everyone. Welcome to What the F is Going On in Latin America and the Caribbean, CODEPINK's bi-weekly podcast of politics in Latin America and the Caribbean. Today, we are broadcasting from Mexico City, and I'm really excited to let you know we are here with Kurt Hackbarth and Jose Luis Granados. And good friends, good journalists, good activists, and you're going to love this conversation. We're broadcasting from the Soberania studio in Mexico City. Soberania, the Mexico politics podcast, of which Kurt and Jose Luis are the hosts and producers. So we've got some real solid conversation coming up for you this morning. I guess maybe we should start. I know all of you probably want to hear about humanitarian aid and oil to Cuba. That's probably the number one thing that the audience is waiting to. So we're going to talk about that. But there's other things happening here in Mexico as well, also in relationship with the United States and other countries in the region too. So maybe let's start with this crazy consulate story in the U.S. The 50 Mexican consulates in the U.S. are being used to take over the United States. Let's just debunk that right here and now.
It's all true. We're coming for you. It's la reconquista. No, not because
they're not only going to take over the states previously held by Mexico, but they're going to expand eastward and northward.
Guadalupe, that'll go in reverse.
Is it. Yeah.
No, you know what? I think the whole farce of this argument is exposed by the very man himself who published this book, who erroneously thought that a map behind the Mexican ambassador to the United States, which read Estados Unidos Mexicanos, was a reference somehow to the United States of Mexico trying to take over the United States of America. The guy doesn't even know the legal constitutional name of the country, which, if you look back actually into the Constitution of 1857, if I'm not mistaken, has been the official name of the country, Estados Unidos Mexicanos, United Mexican States.
It says Mexico. It right on the flag.
I mean, how more obvious can it be? But it reveals the ignorance of this man. He has no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, very briefly, this Schweitzer has kicked around conservative circles for a long time. He's president of the Government Accountability Institute. He's been linked to the Heritage Foundation. And he writes these real kind of right-wing potboilers that then get into that blogosphere in there and then become, get ginned into bestsellers. So you see, the likes of Steve Bannon promoting this new book, right? And you see Trump, tweeting about it in Truth Social. It's called The Invisible Coup, How American Elites and Foreign Powers Immigration is a Weapon. And as we've talked about on the podcast, I think, I don't think the empire has a conscience, Teri, but I think somewhere back in the imperial brain, there's some kind of guilt complex for everything the United States has done domestically and to the world. And that generates this unconscious paranoia. Right? And all of us who follow U.S. politics know that paranoia is such a fundamental part of U.S. politics because of what's behind that. And this is a classic example, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking before the show. If there's any embassy that's trying to manipulate domestic politics, it's the U.S. embassy right down the street. Well, that's not down the street anymore. It's over in Polanco.
Way up north now, in the fancy part of town.
So the idea that the Mexican consulates would be intervening in the U.S. politics is laughable. If anything, go to the Mexican consulates and you'll see a lot of people frustrated because they can't even get a basic trámite done.
Yeah. And, I mean, come on. His argument that he presents, at least in the little video that they shared online, is that how is it that our closest allies only have a handful of consulates and Mexico has 50? Yeah, because there's 50 million Mexicans in the United States. Half of that territory used to be Mexico. It shouldn't be surprising that it's full of Mexicans.
Who would have thought? Really?
Know your history.
Exactly.
But this is, it's silly and it's ridiculous and absurd, but it's also dangerous. At a time when, after the invasion of Venezuela, and before, of course, but precisely afterwards, Trump has talked specifically about wanting to intervene in Mexico through drone bombings or whatever else. The rhetoric has obviously stepped up from the State Department, Marco Rubio demanding tangible results from Mexico in security matters, when just a few months ago he was, falling over himself to compliment Mexico's work in that area. It's a very toxic environment to, see something like this, see Bannon and Trump and that whole machine ginning it up. And you just saw the White House this week glorifying in the most bombastic terms the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848 in the most offensive terms possible.
Offensive, jingoistic, arrogant.
Yeah.
No, it's terrible. And one final thing on this, which I think is important to notice, is that the fact that he's linked to Bannon is the worrisome part of it. This isn't just anybody inventing things and publishing silly arguments in a very poorly researched book. What it is actually very much a campaign that is trying to sow the seeds of distrust, of suspicion between the U.S. public and the Mexican public, precisely because of what you said, because there's an effort to try to lay the groundwork for a unilateral military intervention by the United States, as they have already done in this region. That part has to be underlined in Mexico. That's what this is about. Fortunately, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has done a stellar job of holding off Trump. But if he feels like the conditions are in place to do what he did in Venezuela, which is invade and bomb and attack, I don't think he would kidnap the president, but you never know, then he will. They're basically salivating at the notion of this possibility. This is one of the targets that U.S. imperialism has in this region. It's Mexico.
This might be a good transition to the Cuba topic, Teri.
Exactly, yeah. So this is a big question in the States, well, all over the Caribbean and Latin America. Will Mexico continue humanitarian aid to Cuba, including oil? And that's the question that all of us are asking. I mean, we know oil has gone in the past. We know it's gone through Pemex contracts, and we know it can go as pure aid to Cuba. So what's happening with the oil?
Well, I'll set the stage on this, and there's certainly plenty to comment. First of all, historically, Mexico has had a long relationship of solidarity with Cuba, going back to the revolution. It was the one country in the OAS to object at the beginning to U.S. activities in Cuba, right? And has, championed that cause for a long time. Now the votes are practically unanimous in the UN into this, but Mexico is well ahead of the curve with regards to that. And this has been also something that's extended across governments in Mexico. Right, the support for Cuba, and this is important.
That's
right?
I was going to say
because this has been one important symbolic area where even PRI governments, even somewhat PAN governments, were willing to challenge the U.S. or disobey the U.S. It's been Cuba, so this is symbolically important for Mexico's conception of its sovereignty.
It's also consistent with Mexican foreign policy.
It is consistent with Mexican foreign policy.
Administration to administration.
So what we've seen, obviously, since the invasion of Venezuela, the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro and his wife, is the attempt to starve Cuba out. That do the final step. Marco Rubio wants his scalp, and they think now's the time to go for it. Right. So obviously they've stopped oil shipments coming in from Venezuela. Mexico at its time had actually stepped up oil shipments to Cuba. Then, of course, as we know, the Trump administration came out with its new threat of 100% tariffs on countries that directly or indirectly export oil to Cuba. And for the moment, oil shipments from Mexico are on hold. The President Sheinbaum, was initially somewhat evasive about it, and then has rather clarified the issue that the shipment that was stopped more directly had to do with a contract, an open-ended contract that Pemex has with Cuba. That's suspended for the moment, but she didn't rule out humanitarian shipments of oil to Cuba. Although right now they're in that diplomatic lane of trying to find a way to do that without triggering the
an
tariffs.
Invasion of Mexico.
And an invasion of Mexico. Or, it would be very likely either a stop and seizure at sea or even, a drone bombing of the Mexican tanker where to do that, which could then precipitate, of course, a diplomatic crisis and the like. So they're obviously trying to head that off. They're trying to forestall that. But of course, as we know, as we record this, Cuba has maybe 10 days or so of oil left. So they're against the clock. And kind of as a compromise measure for the moment, Mexico said we will ship other humanitarian aid, non-oil aid, to Cuba, escorted by the Mexican Navy. But it's a difficult position, and this is, I think, something we've also argued. The cool head or cabeza fria approach worked very well for holding off tariffs.
Exactly.
But things are coming to a point now where, a stiffer response, however we know risky that is, may very well become necessary.
On that point, what I would bring up is that fundamentally we have to remember that the culprit here is U.S. imperialism. I think
The Donroe Doctrine.
the Donroe Doctrine, the Trump corollary, whatever you want to call it, whatever invention he's kind of putting out there now. I think that Mexicans have a responsibility to pressure our government to break the blockade. That is one position that we've tried to be consistent of here on Soberania, which is that we understand that there are very serious pressures on Mexico right now from our neighbor, right? We have the misfortune of sharing a border with the United States, and that those threats have to be taken seriously. Nonetheless, the demand, I think, from the streets that are coming is correct, which is break the blockade. Everybody condemns it. They vote at the UN. They pat themselves on the back. But when it comes to actually having to break that blockade, which is already producing a humanitarian crisis on the island, I want to stress that this isn't a problem that began with the kidnapping of Nicolás Maduro. This is a long-standing blockade of Cuba, decades long. But as well, they were already blockading Venezuelan oil. Díaz-Canel gave a press conference today when we're recording this, saying we haven't had oil since December. So this is why they're running out, because the de facto blockade was already in place, and now it's been illegally extended to other countries to compel them. And so we have to figure out, what are we missing that is allowing the situation to get to this point? And I think a lot of that has to do with a very necessary and inadequate to the moment self-criticism of the regional leadership and our regional institutions. We've talked a lot about on the program of the fact that maybe Maduro doesn't get kidnapped if there's enough outrage at the extrajudicial executions in the
boat
Caribbean.
bombings.
And maybe Trump isn't emboldened to implement an extended illegal blockade that applies to every country without any kind of legal basis to it, if we had been able to speak out and condemn universally the kidnapping of a sitting president. Where was the outrage? It was insufficient in my opinion.
There wasn't even any unity among SALAC. I mean, for months, I would say even, a year or more. And I don't put that on Colombia. I put that, I think SALAC started, in my opinion, started weakening after the presidency left AMLO in Mexico.
Yeah, I agree.
He was just...
AMLO got everybody in the same room.
He really did, after a 4-year pause. So one of the things that this humanitarian aid, with or without oil, is testing is the sovereignty of Mexico and its foreign policy. And there's a couple other things happening in the country right now regarding national sovereignty with resources and people. I would say water and rare earth minerals. And the water with agreement with the United States is in the process of being renegotiated now. And where do we stand with that?
Well, the water issue goes back to the 40s, the quote unquote good neighbor policy years, when actually the Roosevelt the Roosevelt administration actually signed a fair treaty with Mexico, one of the few, governing shared watersheds between the Colorado River and the Rio Grande, and what country has to give what to kind of balance that out. What we see here is a multi-year drought in the north of Mexico and the south of the United States, which has simply dried up the watersheds. Right? And the Trump administration is part of a very deliberate attempt to turn the screws on anything and everything since taking office with Trump 2, seized on that, and then refused an emergency request of water for Tijuana, and they started making a big deal about it. This was in the context also of the American screwworm issue, which was banning Mexican cattle from entering the United States, with the airport issue where Mexico required U.S. airlines and cargo flights to move to the new airport, the AIFA, and U.S. airlines complained about slots. So it's a turning of screws on a lot of fronts. They appear to have at least temporarily worked the water issue out, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to try again.
Well, how do you give water when you don't have any? I mean, it's just like on both sides of the border.
The problem is if they reopen the treaty, it will be much less favorable to Mexico than the 40s treaty is. So, that's the same problem we're seeing now with the TMEC, the USMCA
Exactly.
revision.
Yeah.
They want to turn the screws on that. And from at least what we've seen from some leaks, basically kind of do a Platt amendment through the USMCA, which is clear away any regulation to U.S. multinationals, even in the ring-fenced areas of the Mexican economy like energy, and basically a veto in any foreign investment that they don't like, read China.
Yeah.
It's the U.S. policy of Mike makes right. It's them flexing their muscle everywhere they can. The phrase we use in Spanish, chinga quedito, which is kind of prodding and poking and one after another, to basically squeeze from all angles in order to get concessions elsewhere. It is about the water, but it's not really about the water. You know what I mean? It's about the U.S. trying to send a message that no matter what, we're going to use our military, economic might to push everybody around. There is no such thing, arguably there never was, but there is no such thing, I think today, a rules-based international order, right? Nobody's actually abiding by any rules. Even these tariffs.
Not even Mark Carney believes it in any way.
Not even Mark Carney believes it. I mean, he was a central banker of 2 countries. And even he has to admit, it doesn't exist. And I think that means you have to figure out how to guide your foreign policy towards this very aggressive neighbor in a very delicate fashion. I mean, I understand the really kind of difficult situation that Claudia Sheinbaum finds herself in. We are wedded to the United States culturally, politically, even through relations, but also as a result of the free trade agreement. That doesn't get reversed quickly. And it's not on the agenda of the government to do it. And so it is, their effort to, I think, convince the Trump administration that it's best to have Mexico as an ally. And so there will be concessions and there will be negotiations. But the Sheinbaum government strategy is basically that. You need us. So let's work together on these kinds of things. And I think the mineral agreement is a really good example.
Well, that's, you were talking with the water that it's about U.S. control of a resource and
the mineral agreement is basically a protocol. It's like a memorandum of understanding. It's not a signed agreement yet, fortunately. So there's still room for public pressure on this. Basically for the exporting of rare earth minerals in Mexico into the United States with a floor of price, a certain price floor, can we say facilitate import. Basically, it's, and you see this Marcelo Ebrard with his big smile with the U.S. trade representative yesterday. It's very, very, very problematic because, as we've talked about again and again, what the United States wants to do is outsource all of its supply chain to the Americas. And that means cheap labor, but that also means, resources like the rare earths to not have to depend on Asia. Well, they apparently also have a rare earth deal with Japan in the works.
It wants to outsource and have total control.
And have total control so that they can then go to their next imperial plans, which is war on Iran. And ultimately, the China hawks in the administration want, both Biden and Trump want war on China by 2030. So they want to be able to source everything locally,
hemispherically.
And so the pressure on rare earths is huge, right? When China put its rare earth export controls in response to U.S. chip, right?
The tit for tat there.
And the like.
So, with this rare earth mineral memorandum of understanding, it's not just Mexico. It's quite a few countries throughout and Japan, but quite a few countries throughout the hemisphere. And this was this came about after a meeting. I don't even know that they called it a meeting or a consultation that Rubio had throughout the hemisphere. It was Monday or Tuesday. And so it involves Bolivia now, Argentina, I want to say Costa Rica also, but I could be wrong about that. But
and that's dangerous.
Hemispheric control.
That's dangerous because, of course, Mexico under López Obrador nationalized its lithium stores. But, of course, they're in Sonora, dangerously close to the border with the United States. And we know the multinationals want their mitts all over the lithium, right? Yeah. Because Mexican lithium is a little bit harder to process, right? It's in some way, I don't even know how we say that, but it's a harder process, Mexican lithium, than, say, Bolivian or Argentinian lithium.
No, Chile too.
Chile too, right? The lithium triangle in South America.
Yeah. So but it's more than lithium. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. It's high tech.
It's high tech. All the rare earths
Silicon Valley
for
stuff.
chips and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's distressing, that there are voices within Mexico's Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores, which seem to have this very naive idea, kind of the Ebrardists there, that if you just create, commercial deals with the United States, everything will just be okay. And it's really like putting your head in the sand. And that's the most distressing part of this whole thing. They're like, we just have to basically make ourselves indispensable to the United States and they'll leave us alone. Well, actually, no, they won't. No, they won't.
Native Americans learned that.
Yeah, and it's very dangerous that there's a grouping within SRE that not only says it, but appears to actually believe it, which is incredible to me.
Well, Mexico sits in a very precarious place on the map of the globe. So a very aggressive neighbor to the north. So it's a tough. I'll give a huge shout out to Claudia because she's really, holding as much as possible without compromising the people of Mexico.
So that was actually what I was going to bring up. The thing is that we have to understand that in Mexico, the priority is to continue the heart of the fourth transformation, which is about building a welfare state, about providing welfare to the population, about reversing decades of neoliberalism. And so Claudia has to balance these external pressures with the domestic priorities, which, clearly point to a strategy that says, as Kurt was saying, let's try to convince the United States that we're better off as partners, we're better off cooperating than as antagonists. And so far it's working, to their credit, right? I think we have a hapless opposition in this country, and so therefore the real threat to the fourth transformation is imperialism. I maintain that it's the primary contradiction here. And so there has to be an eye towards preserving the domestic project without sacrificing too much on the external file, which I do think that we are approaching that line of conceding too much. Because the argument I make, say, for example, to go back to the case of Cuba, is that, sure, over the short term, you can concede and it protects you, but that concession over the long term will inevitably be harmful because you're less positioned to be able to respond to them on a whim, changing their mind about how they want to relate to Mexico.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we saw with President Sheinbaum with regards to the Cuba situation saying, we'll do everything I can without, obviously, harming the people of Mexico. One understands that. But if they're willing to let, for example, Cuba be sacrificed in something that's so symbolically important to Mexican sovereignty, one can only guess what could come next, right?
Well, it could come after our oil.
Of course, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And, we've seen this over and over again in the history of Latin America, but it's this attempt to kind of hold off the U.S. beast while you try to build a basic welfare state that, and a basic humanitarian, humane system, right, away from the, the savage capitalism imposed from the north, just to try to hold it off just enough. And time after time, of course, the U.S. beast steps in, stomps all over things, and then they have to start all over again. And start all over again and start all over again. So you see Sheinbaum again trying to do the same thing. And this week we just had the inauguration of a wonderful new infrastructure project, which is the what's called the insurgent train from the city of Toluca to Mexico City to Observatorio. It reduces a 2 to 2.5 hour very ugly commute to 50 minutes for $5. And it links right up with the Observatorio bus station and line 1 of the metro, right? Yeah, we also see train projects. There's the train that's going from Buena Vista to the AIFA, the new airport, which is soon to be opened, 2 long-distance train lines heading to the U.S. border. We see the push to really get finally to universal healthcare through this universal credentialization, where everybody, regardless of what system, what pipeline they're in, is going to have shared health records and a health card, so that they can go to any hospital, even if it's in a different system, right? There are different public systems here. We see
really is universal healthcare,
actual universal healthcare, not you have to buy an HMO private plan. There are so many pushes on so many different fronts here. So, one can't help but have a tragic sense of life, I think, when one follows Latin American politics too much. You see these noble attempts time after time against this just encroachment, and we're seeing it worse now than ever. And they're trying to basically beat the clock. Like with the Mexico plan, too. They're trying to get enough of the Mexico plan in place so that it can't be as easily overturned.
You mentioned the various trains. California's still trying to build.
Yeah. How's that going?
So,
How's that going?
Yeah. There's one going to open in my neighborhood soon, so to the airport. So it's very exciting. But I think this is these homegrown projects, these socialist projects, these people-oriented projects are so crucial, and it's why so many people just fell in love with AMLO, and we're so happy to see, Claudia succeed him, is the continuation of these projects. And I give her a lot of credit for pushing back against the United States and still, as you said, keeping the Mexican people front and center with what's needed here. Education, healthcare, infrastructure projects, water, all of that.
Yeah, and she is holding them off in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
that has to also be recognized. We're not seeing the kinds of overt efforts at undermining the political project that we saw in Honduras, that we saw in Argentina to favor Milei, that we're witnessing in Colombia right now, right? There are elected U.S. politicians right now openly talking about how to defeat the progressive candidate, Iván Cepeda, in the upcoming elections. At least we don't have that kind of weighing upon us and gives us a little bit of breathing room.
Exactly.
But of course, according to Peter Schweitzer, it's the Mexican consulates. Right?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Not what's going on in Colombia right now and what will be going on in Brazil, at the same time.
Let's talk about this really controversial taxation case with Salinas Pliegas, because this is a very helpful in understanding how wealthy people evade contributing to the social projects and people of a country. And this was a very significant resolution and allows for some additional finances to go into the country and the people.
Yeah, so Ricardo Salinas Pliego is one of Mexico's wealthiest magnates, although his fortune has fallen on hard times of late.
In the U.S. too, I believe.
President of the Salinas Foundation, Grupo Salinas, and TV Azteca, Mexico's second largest television station. Far right, very vulgar online. He's one of these billionaires that can't seem to find anything better to do than insult people online. It's like you would think, with all that money, you can do something else with your life. And the Grupo Salinas, over time, has racked up a nearly $3 billion back tax bill. They also owe a lot of money in the U.S., and he's also wanted in U.S. courts. They had to pay bail there as well. So this is a cross-border thing. This is symptomatic of Mexican oligarchy in general, which have used all kinds of tax loopholes and favorable, judicial rulings over the years, plus friendly presidents that would just condone their taxes in exchange for favors.
Yeah,
I would just condone this, condone that, just very discretion, at their discretion. So that became a toxic cocktail where the people would just, would either get loans or credits or, kind of shell game money between different, companies in order to declare losses. And, we know the whole game. We know the whole multinational way of avoiding taxes. So they played that to the hilt. And finally, thanks to Mexico's judicial reform, where Mexico elects its judges, its full judiciary and 2 sets of elections, including a whole new Supreme Court, the Supreme Court finally ruled against him. So that's what it takes. That's what it takes. It took, it took Morena winning a supermajority in both houses of Congress in order to be able to pass constitutional reforms on its own. AMLO had tried with Plan A and Plan B to reform all this stuff before we got to Plan C, which is asked the public for a supermajority, which he got. That's what allowed this to happen, and that's what's required Salinas Pliego to finally cough up not all of it, but a first down payment on it, and the rest is going to come in 18 down payments. So,
but it was a pretty
abonos chiquitos, just like Electoral.
Just like Electoral.
There you go. But one thing I would say to expand on your point about the judicial reform, which is that this is why it is a political question. You want the rich to pay, you have to have the political power to do it. To do it, you have to actually deliver to the population, so they reward you with more political power. And I think that part has to be part of our calculus in terms of how this happened, because it's very easy to say tax the rich, but it's actually hard to do it. And in fact, what's been happening with the López Obrador administration and the Claudia Sheinbaum administration has been precisely record numbers of government income, because they've been taxing the people who had gotten away with not paying. The challenge, though, is those low-hanging fruit are running out. I mean, they've basically had to engage in an all-out war with one of the oligarchs of this country to get him to pay. And there's only so much you can get by that, which means I think eventually Mexico's going to have to reckon with the need for fiscal reform.
That's another line.
The tax code.
That's another line they're getting close to, right? There's the one line of getting too close and conceding too much to the United States, and there's the other line of how much can you do without that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
These are challenges coming ahead for the Sheinbaum administration, no doubt, right?
Well, but she's holding the line, and there's a lot to be said for that.
Absolutely. Well, she must be exceedingly frustrated, because she has a very ambitious domestic program, and she's also, she's an environmental, scientist. She has a scientific background, so she's got a very capable team capable of carrying out these projects. And the frustration is she's having to deal with the United States every goddamn day.
It comes up every day.
Every goddamn day.
Yeah. Every day. Every day. That's what I mean. That's the primary contradiction. It's not the opposition that's stopping this.
Opposition is basically not even present. It's just they're not even in the conversation.
Well, that's kind of good. Except kind of enemy out of sight isn't always the best thing either.
Well, they're going to do what they did in Venezuela. We talked a lot about this on the program, which is their turn to insurrectionary strategies, to pay people to calentar las calles, to engage in violent street protests, which is not actually reflective of the mood in the country, in order to destabilize. That's what they do. That's the path they're going.
And we saw that.
And then they'll beg for intervention by the United States, and we have a United States government right now that is willing to entertain that possibility.
That's right. We saw that with the so-called Generation Z march,
exactly,
right? At the end of last year, which was obviously a very transparent attempt at ginning up a kind of color revolution, right?
Yeah, very small and very violent, though.
And what we'll see coming up, so watch this space, is the big fight now is going to be over. They're going to be introducing very soon a proposal for electoral reform here in Mexico to go after the partidocracy, which they're called, the people who live high on the hog off of public financing, the party bigwigs, and also use Mexico's proportional representation seats, called plurinominales, as a real patronage mechanism. So you see a lot of very unsavory people who don't have to campaign and just get into Congress through these PR seats. Now, of course, public financing and PR seats are important. So the line you have to walk is to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because if you reduce public financing, where's the financing going to come from? That's what they're working on right now. But already they're trying to gin the whole thing up from what opposition there is. This is another authoritarian maneuver on the part.
Well, we're going to have another conversation.
Those headlines
about
are coming. I'm going to pull a Joe Namath. I guarantee it.
Yeah. That's right.
So, listen, everybody, this has been just a really wonderful episode. I'm so honored to have shared the space.
It's cool to do it here in the studio.
Yeah, we're like in this totally professional studio.
Actually, that's thanks to the support of our viewers and listeners. They basically paid for all of this by supporting the program.
Soberania, your program.
Yes.
So why don't you tell the audience how they can find you on YouTube and social media, you individually as well as your program?
Yeah, so I'm Kurt Hackbarth, at Kurt Hackbarth on X, or at Kurt_Hackbarth on Instagram, also on Facebook and TikTok. You can find me there. Soberania itself comes out every Wednesday morning at 9:30, a weekly episode. And you can find that on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. We also have a long-form interview program called El Taller, which is linked to that. And we were on hiatus for Christmas break, but we'll be coming back to that in February. And that's all on our YouTube channel.
Yep. And you can also find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can find me on social media, Granados Ceja, GRANADOSCEJA. I'm on all the social media platforms. And you can catch us on Canal 11. Here in Mexico and on YouTube on Sin Muros, which comes out every Tuesday night.
Show.
It's in Spanish, but hey, maybe it's an excuse for you to brush up on your Spanish.
Brush up on your Spanish. And I'm also on the show Macio Sare, also on Wednesdays. All of that's on Canal 11. on YouTube. And if you're living in an area with a large Spanish population, it might even be part of your cable package. So check that out. Mexico's Canal 11.
Okay, guys, thanks again. And for the audience, you can find me on CODEPINK's What the F is Going On in Latin America and the Caribbean. We regularly broadcast twice monthly on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Today is a very special broadcast. Very lucky, very fortunate to have time with both of you. Really an honor.
Oh, no, it's an honor to work with you.
Thanks, Teri.
Terrifically
Thanks, Teri.
educational. So, okay, everyone, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.